It was the 4th of July weekend in Nashville, a day meant for family, fireworks, and celebration. But instead of joy, the city woke up to shock. Inside a quiet condominium, police discovered a scene that would forever change the world of sports and the lives of two families. Steve McNair, the NFL superstar once known for his strength, leadership, and resilience, was found lifeless beside a young woman named Sahel Kazemi, a woman who had once adored him. News spread fast. Fans, friends, and family were stunned. How could the man who led teams to victory and inspired millions end up here? The headlines painted a picture of confusion, some whispered betrayal, others said heartbreak. But beneath the surface lay something much more complicated, a hidden relationship that had spiraled far beyond control. Steve McNair wasn't just another athlete, he was a legend. Known for playing through pain, for leading by example, and for being the man who never gave up. But off the field, his personal life told a different story, a story few ever saw coming. Behind the fame and admiration was a man searching for peace in a world that demanded too much of him. And Sahel Kazemi, a 20-year-old waitress with dreams of stability and love, believed she had found everything she wanted in him. But what started as affection soon turned into something that neither of them could escape. In the days leading up to that tragic morning, their relationship began to crack under pressure, emotions rising, secrets deepening, and choices being made that could never be undone. No one knew that behind their smiles and the silence of closed doors, a storm was building, one that would soon leave two lives destroyed and an entire nation asking one question: what really happened between Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi? This story isn't just about fame or love, it's about how desire, fear, and heartbreak can collide in ways no one expects. It's about the unseen struggles that hide behind public success. And as we go deeper into their world, you'll see how every decision, every secret, led them closer to a moment that could never be taken back. Because sometimes, what looks like love from the outside can hide something much darker within. And for Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi, that truth would come to light on one unforgettable night. Now, let's go back to where it all began, to the man who had it all, yet still felt something missing. Before tragedy ever entered his life, Steve McNair was the kind of man who seemed untouchable. Born in a small town in Mississippi, he was raised with discipline, hard work, and a quiet determination that would one day make him one of the NFL's most respected quarterbacks. Those who knew him said he had a fire in his eyes even as a child, the kind that refused to quit, no matter how tough things got. On the field, McNair was known for his toughness. He played through injuries that would have sidelined most players. Broken ribs, torn muscles, constant pain, he pushed through it all because quitting was never an option. Fans loved him not just for his skill, but for his heart. He wasn't just a quarterback, he was a symbol of endurance, of never backing down, of giving everything you had until the very last second. Off the field, Steve was the picture of success. Married to Michelle McNair, a beautiful, soft-spoken woman who supported him through every high and low, he appeared to have the perfect family life. 2 sons, a successful career, and the respect of everyone around him. To the public eye, he was living the dream, the model of what a hard-working man could become. But behind the bright lights and roaring stadiums, Steve's world was far more complicated. The pressure of fame, the demands of his career, and the weight of expectations began to wear on him. He was known for being generous, often helping friends, family, and even strangers. Yet, that same generosity sometimes left him feeling drained, giving so much to everyone else that there was little left for himself. As he approached the later years of his career, McNair began searching for something more, something beyond the applause and the headlines. He wanted peace, maybe even escape. Retiring from the game he loved had left a void, one that fame and money couldn't fill. Those close to him said he often seemed restless, as if he was trying to outrun a silence he didn't know how to face. And in that silence, someone new would enter his life, a young woman who saw him not as a football hero, but as a man. Her name was Sahel Kazemi. To her, Steve McNair wasn't a celebrity, he was someone who listened, who cared, and who made her feel seen. For Steve, she was a breath of fresh air, a reminder of simplicity, youth, and freedom. What started as casual companionship slowly grew into something deeper. It wasn't love in the fairy tale sense, but it was connection, and perhaps that was exactly what Steve had been missing. But as we'll soon see, the world he had built, the image of control and composure, was about to face a test far greater than anything he had endured on the field. Because while Steve McNair had mastered the art of leading others, he couldn't control what was about to happen next. The man who once conquered every challenge was about to face one that no amount of strength or courage could overcome. And it all began when his path crossed with a young woman who carried her own dreams, and her own pain, into his world. Sahel Kazemi's story began far from the fame and spotlight that surrounded Steve McNair. She was born in Iran and spent her early years in struggle. Life wasn't easy, her family faced hardship, and her father passed away when she was still very young. Seeking a better future, her family moved to the United States, settling in Florida and eventually Tennessee, where Sahel tried to build a life of her own. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was living in Nashville, working as a waitress at Dave & Buster's. Those who knew her described her as warm, friendly, and hard-working, the kind of person who could light up a room but carried invisible weight behind her smile. She dreamed of stability, independence, and love, things she had always been chasing but never fully found. Then came the day she met him, Steve McNair. He was everything she wasn't used to, calm, confident, and surrounded by an air of success. Their first meeting was simple, a conversation that turned into laughter, a spark that neither of them ignored. For Sahel, being with Steve felt like a doorway into a world she had only seen from a distance. A world of comfort, affection, and importance. And for Steve, Sahel was a reminder of youth, of passion, and of life outside responsibility. As their connection deepened, Sahel believed she had found something real. To her, Steve wasn't the NFL superstar, he was the man who made her feel valued, someone she could build a future with. She told friends she was in love and that he promised to leave his wife to be with her. Whether those promises were ever real or imagined, they became the center of her life. But the closer she got to him, the more the cracks began to show. The relationship wasn't as stable as she thought. Steve still had his family, and Sahel's dreams of being his only one started to collide with reality. Her finances were crumbling, her emotions were fragile, and every time he pulled away, she held on tighter. She had once told a friend, "I can't lose him. I just can't." Those words carried pain that few noticed, a warning sign hidden behind affection. Sahel's world began revolving entirely around Steve, and when something becomes your entire world, losing it feels like losing yourself. By the summer of 2009, their relationship was slipping into chaos. Sahel was struggling to make car payments on the vehicle Steve had helped her buy, and her mind was filled with doubts. She wanted answers, clarity, and a future that never seemed to arrive. Every text, every missed call, every unanswered question fed into her growing desperation. And as we'll see soon, that desperation would build into something neither of them could control. Before we move on, take a second to really think about this. How many people out there give everything to someone, hoping it'll make them stay, only to lose themselves in the process? If you've ever seen someone love too hard, or been through something that made you question your own worth, drop the time you're watching this video in the comments below. Let's see how many of us have felt that same ache. And for those who haven't hit subscribe yet, go ahead, tell me why in the comments. I'll read every reason, because your thoughts matter here. But if you do choose to subscribe, do it not for me, but for every story like Sahel's, where love and pain meet in ways the world often forgets. Now, let's go deeper into how this relationship, one that started with affection, began to spiral into something that no one could stop. Behind closed doors, Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi were living a story that very few people knew about. To the public, Steve was still the dedicated husband, the retired NFL star who gave back to his community, and the proud father who spent weekends with his kids. But when the cameras turned off and the stadium lights dimmed, his world was far more complicated. It started quietly. A few dinners, late-night drives, secret phone calls, things that seemed harmless at first. But soon, those moments became the center of their lives. Steve rented a private condominium in downtown Nashville, a place where he and Sahel could escape from the pressures of the outside world. It became their hidden sanctuary, their escape from judgment, and eventually, the very place where their story would end. For Sahel, this secret relationship was everything. She told her friends that Steve was the love of her life, that he cared for her deeply, and that he planned to leave his wife for her. Whether those words came from him or from her own hope, they became her truth. To her, their love was real, and it was only a matter of time before it became official. Steve, on the other hand, lived in two different worlds. In one, he was the family man, taking his wife to events, spending time with his kids, and keeping up appearances. In the other, he was with Sahel, a woman who made him feel young again, someone who didn't ask him to be perfect. But trying to keep both worlds balanced was like walking a tightrope over a storm. Every lie, every secret, every hidden text was a thread that could unravel everything. McNair's generosity played a big role in deepening their bond. He bought Sahel gifts, took her on trips, and even co-signed for her car, a black Cadillac Escalade that made her feel seen and valued. To outsiders, it looked like a sign of love. But to those who knew Steve well, it was also a sign of pressure. He cared for her, yes, but he also felt responsible for her. And that sense of responsibility would soon become a burden he couldn't manage. As time went on, friends began noticing changes in Sahel. She became more possessive, more anxious, and more fearful that she was losing him. When she couldn't reach Steve, she would panic. Her friends recalled her pacing, crying, and questioning if he was with someone else. She had built her entire future around him, and the idea of losing him terrified her. For Steve, the situation was becoming more difficult to handle. He tried to keep things calm, tried to maintain peace, but the distance between them was growing. Every time he tried to step back, Sahel would pull him closer. He didn't realize that behind her tears and silence, a storm was quietly forming. And yet, despite the tension, they continued to see each other, almost as if both were trapped in a cycle they couldn't break. The secrecy, the passion, the guilt, it all blended into a relationship that felt both exciting and dangerous. They were two people from different worlds, bound together by feelings they couldn't control. But the truth is, every secret has an expiration date. And theirs was running out fast. As we move forward, you'll see how the weight of this hidden relationship began to collapse under its own pressure, leading to moments that no one saw coming. Because when a love built on secrecy starts to fall apart, it rarely ends quietly. By the summer of 2009, the cracks in Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi's secret world were no longer invisible, they were spreading fast, and neither of them seemed able to stop it. What began as a thrilling escape from reality was now turning into a slow collapse built on fear, confusion, and desperation. Sahel was struggling. Her bills were piling up, and the Escalade that once symbolized love and security had become a burden she could no longer afford. She had recently been pulled over for a DUI while driving that same car, a vehicle registered in both her name and Steve's. That arrest wasn't just a small mistake, it was a spark that exposed the cracks in everything they had built. Steve was in the passenger seat that night, watching as police took her license, and her life began to unravel in front of him. After that night, things shifted. Sahel's friends said she was different, quieter, moodier, and more unpredictable. She began asking questions no one could answer. Why hasn't he left his wife yet? Why doesn't he pick up when I call? Her insecurity turned into suspicion, and her suspicion turned into fear. She began to believe that Steve was slipping away, that the man she loved and built her dreams around was ready to move on without her. Steve, meanwhile, was trying to manage the growing tension. He was still seeing her but from a distance, trying to calm her down, trying to make things right without causing more chaos. But Sahel wasn't just heartbroken, she was overwhelmed. The life she thought she was building was falling apart, and she was losing control. Friends said she cried constantly and talked about her problems as if she had nowhere left to turn. In the days leading up to July 4th, her messages to Steve became more emotional, almost pleading. She wanted to know where she stood, what their future was, and why everything suddenly felt so uncertain. But Steve wasn't offering the reassurance she needed. He was busy with family, friends, and his own life. And for someone like Sahel, who had already lost so much, silence felt like abandonment. She began to spiral. The weight of financial pressure, emotional exhaustion, and the fear of being replaced pushed her to a breaking point. Those around her noticed the change. She talked about her problems one moment and seemed calm the next. It was as if she was caught between hope and despair, waiting for something, anything, to give her direction. But what no one realized was how close that direction was to turning deadly. Just days before the tragedy, Sahel purchased a gun. Friends didn't understand why. She claimed it was for protection, but her behavior said otherwise. She seemed distracted, distant, and lost in thought, like she was preparing for something that no one else could see coming. And while Steve was out smiling, attending parties, and appearing calm, there was something brewing behind the surface. The balance he had carefully maintained between his public life and private one was collapsing. Every choice, every secret, every delay had started to lead toward one inevitable outcome. By that point, their story was no longer just about love, it was about control, fear, and the inability to let go. Sahel wasn't just afraid of losing Steve, she was afraid of losing her identity, her purpose, and her place in his world. And as that July weekend approached, those fears were about to explode into reality. Because sometimes, when emotions burn too intensely for too long, they stop being about love, and start being about survival. And on that holiday weekend, that line would finally be crossed. July 4th, 2009, the day that should have been filled with laughter, fireworks, and celebration, would instead become one of the darkest days in Nashville's history. From the outside, everything appeared normal. Steve McNair was smiling, moving between friends, and enjoying the long weekend. But beneath that calm surface, both his life and Sahel Kazemi's were spiraling toward a point of no return. That morning, Sahel woke up restless. She had recently argued with Steve, and despite his attempts to calm her, she felt the distance growing wider. She spent the day texting friends, telling them she was confused and exhausted. Some recalled her saying she didn't know what to do anymore. Her words were heavy, like someone standing at the edge of a decision that couldn't be undone. Meanwhile, Steve was out enjoying his day. He had plans with friends, attended parties, and spent time on his boat. To everyone around him, he seemed relaxed, the same charismatic man they always knew. No one could have guessed that in just a few hours, everything would change. Earlier that week, Sahel had purchased a gun. She claimed it was for personal safety after her DUI arrest, but her recent emotional state made that explanation hard to believe. She was quiet, distracted, and increasingly withdrawn. Friends noticed her unusual behavior, but no one truly understood the storm building inside her. As night approached, Steve and Sahel exchanged a few messages. Their tone wasn't angry, but there was tension. She wanted reassurance. He wanted peace. He was juggling multiple worlds, his family at home and the secret relationship he couldn't fully walk away from. That balance had always been fragile, but on this night, it would finally break. At some point, Sahel decided to drive to the downtown condo, the private place where they had shared so many moments together. Witnesses later said she looked upset, driving alone through the quiet Nashville streets. She carried the same gun she had bought days earlier. Steve returned to that same condo later that night, after spending time with friends. He parked his car, walked upstairs, and went inside, unaware of what was waiting for him. The timeline after that becomes blurred, no witnesses, no sounds heard by neighbors, just silence. The next morning, July 4th, around midday, police were called after Steve's friend discovered the unthinkable. Steve McNair was found lying on the couch, shot multiple times. Beside him was Sahel Kazemi, motionless, with a single gunshot wound. The weapon was on the floor beneath her. The news spread like wildfire. Within minutes, sports fans, reporters, and friends of both were in disbelief. How could a man who once inspired millions with his strength and courage be gone in such a way? And how could the woman who once loved him become the reason for his end? The scene was confusing, no forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just silence and questions. It didn't make sense. People wanted to believe there was another explanation, a third person, a robbery, anything but this. But as investigators began piecing together the evidence, the truth started to take shape, one that was far more heartbreaking than anyone expected. What no one realized in that moment was that the tragedy was deeper than a single act of violence. It was the final chapter of a love story that had burned too fast, too intensely, until it consumed everything in its path. And as detectives began tracing the final hours of their lives, the pieces would start to connect, revealing a pattern of pain, desperation, and choices that could never be reversed. Because what happened that night wasn't random. It was the result of emotions that had been building for months. And soon, investigators would uncover just how far those emotions had gone. When the police first arrived at the downtown Nashville condo, they faced a scene that didn't immediately make sense. Steve McNair, a national sports figure, admired and respected, lay lifeless on the couch, while just inches away, Sahel Kazemi's body rested on the floor. At first glance, the scene looked like chaos frozen in time, but the more investigators studied it, the clearer it became that this wasn't a random act. Something deeply personal had happened here. The room was quiet, undisturbed. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no evidence of a struggle. That alone told investigators that whoever did this had been welcomed inside. McNair had trusted this person, and that trust had cost him everything. As the details emerged, so did the questions. Steve had been shot 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the temple, and once in the neck. Each shot fired from close range, leaving little doubt that he hadn't seen it coming. Sahel, on the other hand, had a single gunshot wound, and the gun was found beneath her body. That discovery changed everything. The possibility of a double homicide began to fade, replaced by a more painful truth, a murder-suicide. The evidence started connecting piece by piece. The gun found beneath Sahel's body was traced back to a local store. Just 2 days earlier, she had purchased it under her own name. The store clerk later said she seemed calm but distant, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. At the time, no one thought anything of it. But now, that small transaction had become the key to understanding everything. Detectives began reviewing phone records, text messages, and surveillance footage from the days leading up to the tragedy. What they found painted a devastating picture. In her final days, Sahel had been sending emotional and anxious messages to Steve. She was desperate for clarity about their relationship. She asked him where they stood, told him she was tired, that she couldn't take the confusion anymore. His responses were polite, calm, but distant, not the reassurance she was looking for. The night before their deaths, Sahel was seen with Steve, smiling at a restaurant. But beneath that smile was something breaking. Friends later recalled her saying that she was done with everything, and didn't know what her future looked like. That same night, she drove home alone. Steve went out with friends, unaware that his next visit to the condo would be his last. As investigators pieced together their movements, the timeline became clear. Sahel had arrived at the condo first. She waited. When Steve came in later that night, she confronted him. Whether it was about jealousy, heartbreak, or fear, no one would ever truly know. But in that moment, emotions overcame reason. The autopsy reports confirmed what detectives already suspected: Steve McNair never had a chance to react. He had been sitting on the couch, possibly asleep, when the shots were fired. Sahel's final action was to turn the gun on herself. The case, to the police, was closed. A murder-suicide, driven by emotion, confusion, and despair. But to the public, the conclusion felt incomplete. How could someone so full of life, like Sahel, reach that point? Why hadn't anyone seen the signs earlier? Some questioned if she had acted alone or if there was more to the story. Yet, the evidence was undeniable: the gun, the texts, the timeline, all pointed to her. When the official report was released, it was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Steve McNair, 36 years old, killed by Sahel Kazemi, 20, before she turned the gun on herself. No conspiracy, no outside forces, just a tragic end to a relationship that had become too heavy to bear. As the police cleared the scene, they took one last look around that quiet condo. Two lives, two paths, both colliding in one irreversible moment. A story that started in admiration and affection had ended in grief and disbelief. And as news spread across the country, the world began to ask the same question: how did no one see this coming? But while the investigation may have closed the file, it couldn't close the wounds it left behind. Because for everyone who knew them, and for the families forced to live with that loss, the answers would never feel complete. And as the headlines faded, what remained was something deeper: the reflection of how quickly love can turn into loss when communication and trust disappear. The aftermath of Steve McNair's death was unlike anything Nashville, or the entire sports world, had ever experienced. News of his passing spread like wildfire, shaking fans, friends, and teammates to their core. For many, it didn't seem real. Steve wasn't just a football legend, he was a symbol of perseverance, strength, and quiet leadership. To see his name in headlines surrounded by words like murder and suicide felt impossible. Outside the condo where he died, fans gathered with flowers, jerseys, and candles. They stood in silence, some crying openly, others just staring, trying to understand how someone who seemed to have everything could meet such a tragic end. Across the country, sports stations replayed his highlights: the grit, the comebacks, the unforgettable moments on the field. But behind every tribute was a painful question: what happened to the man off the field? The Tennessee Titans released a heartfelt statement, calling McNair the heartbeat of the franchise. Former teammates spoke about his loyalty, his humility, and his ability to lead through chaos. Many said Steve was more than a quarterback, he was a friend who carried others through their darkest days. That made his death even harder to process. But as the mourning continued, so did the confusion. The revelation that the young woman found dead beside him was not his wife but his girlfriend sent shockwaves through the public. The story shifted from pure tragedy to one complicated by questions of loyalty, secrecy, and double lives. News outlets dissected every angle: the age difference, their relationship, the motive. Overnight, what had once been a private affair became national conversation. Steve's widow, Michelle McNair, remained dignified and silent throughout the storm. While others speculated, she focused on protecting their 4 sons from the media frenzy. Her pain was unimaginable: losing her husband, learning the truth about his affair, and facing a world eager to judge every decision he made. In interviews years later, she would say that her faith was the only thing that kept her standing. For Sahel Kazemi's family, the reaction was just as heavy. Her loved ones struggled to accept the police conclusion that she had pulled the trigger. They described her as kind, ambitious, and full of dreams. To them, the image of her as a murderer didn't fit. They insisted she was under immense emotional stress and financially burdened after losing her job and facing car payments and rent. Still, the evidence was hard to refute. The media coverage, though relentless, reflected the duality of the story, one of fame and fallibility, love and heartbreak. Some saw it as a lesson about the pressures of living 2 lives. Others saw it as a reminder that behind public success, private pain can silently grow. In Nashville, the Titans held a public memorial. Thousands attended. Former coaches spoke, players shared memories, and fans wept openly. The city honored Steve not for how his life ended, but for how he lived it, with heart, resilience, and quiet strength. Over time, documentaries, interviews, and retrospectives revisited the case, each trying to find new meaning in what happened. But no matter how much people analyzed it, one truth remained: 2 lives were lost, and countless others were changed forever. In the years that followed, Steve McNair's legacy endured, not as a perfect man, but as a human being who inspired millions and made mistakes like anyone else. His story became a cautionary tale about love, secrecy, and the emotional weight that even the strongest people can carry. And while time has helped heal some of the pain, the memory of that summer day in 2009 still lingers, not as a scandal, but as a tragedy that reminded the world how fragile life, love, and trust can truly be. Steve McNair's story, even years after his death, remains one of the most complex legacies in modern sports. His name is still spoken with respect, admiration, and a deep sense of sorrow. On the field, he was the embodiment of perseverance, a man who carried his team through pain, fought through injury, and gave everything to the game he loved. Off the field, his story became a reminder of how even the strongest among us can be weighed down by human struggles we rarely see. For many, McNair's legacy goes far beyond touchdowns and trophies. It's about what he represented, the quiet resilience of a man who came from nothing and rose to the top through sheer determination. He became a symbol of hope for kids who grew up in small towns, showing them that with effort and discipline, dreams could become reality. But the tragedy that ended his life added a haunting layer, a truth that success, fame, and fortune don't shield anyone from emotional turmoil or poor decisions. The story of Steve and Sahel also forced uncomfortable conversations about relationships built in secrecy, the pressures of fame, and how emotional instability can quickly spiral when left unchecked. It reminded people that even those who seem to have it all may be silently battling confusion, loneliness, or fear. It made fans question how much they truly know about their heroes, and how often we overlook signs of emotional distress in others simply because they seem fine. In the years since his passing, the NFL community has continued to honor McNair's memory. Young players still speak his name with reverence. Former teammates share stories about his toughness, his generosity, and the countless ways he quietly helped others without ever seeking credit. His alma mater, Alcorn State, still celebrates him as one of their greatest sons, a man who made history for historically black colleges by showing the world that talent and leadership know no boundaries. But perhaps the greatest lesson in his legacy is a deeply human one, that every life, no matter how bright, carries shadows. Steve McNair's life teaches us that unchecked emotional pain, hidden secrets, and unhealthy attachments can destroy even the most admired figures. And Sahel Kazemi's story reminds us that desperation and heartbreak can cloud reason in devastating ways. Both lives ended far too soon, and in the worst possible way, but from that tragedy came conversations that still matter today. About communication, about seeking help, and about the need to face emotional turmoil before it turns into irreversible damage. Steve McNair will forever be remembered for his strength, but also as a cautionary figure whose story shows that strength alone isn't enough. What we do with our pain, how we handle our emotions, and how honest we are with ourselves and others can determine everything. And maybe that's the true legacy left behind, not just of an athlete or a love story gone wrong, but of 2 people who remind us that behind every smile, there's a story we may never fully understand. If you made it this far, take a moment to reflect, not just on Steve and Sahel's story, but on your own. Who in your life might be struggling silently? Who might need to hear that it's okay to ask for help? Because sometimes, remembering isn't just about honoring the past, it's about learning from it. As we reach the end of this story, one thing becomes painfully clear: no amount of success, fame, or love can protect a person from the consequences of emotional pain left unspoken. Steve McNair was a man who inspired millions. He carried entire teams, pushed through broken bones, and stood tall through pressure that would have crushed most people. Yet, behind that strength was a quiet storm, one that even he couldn't control. Sahel Kazemi was young, hopeful, and searching for something real. She believed she'd found it in Steve, but what she didn't realize was that love built on secrecy and imbalance can become a trap. And in the end, it consumed them both. Two lives, full of promise, ended far too soon, not because of hate, but because of pain, confusion, and silence. If this story teaches us anything, it's that no one is untouchable. No matter who you are, what you've achieved, or how strong you appear, you still need peace, honesty, and emotional balance. This tragedy wasn't just about fame or mistakes, it was about what happens when people lose sight of themselves in the chaos of love and pressure. And now, I want you to do something simple: look at the time you're watching this video and leave it in the comments below. Because moments like this, where we pause to reflect on the real meaning behind a story, matter more than we realize. If you're someone who believes that every story holds a lesson, then go ahead and subscribe, not for the numbers, but because stories like this remind us that life is fragile, and understanding it deeply can change the way we live. And for those who don't want to subscribe, tell us why in the comments. Speak your mind. Whether it's doubt, disagreement, or simply your thoughts, your perspective matters here. This isn't just a channel, it's a space where real stories meet real people. Steve McNair and Sahel Kazemi's story isn't just a tragedy, it's a reflection of how easily life can shift when love, stress, and silence collide. So before you scroll away, take a moment to think about what truly matters: the people you love, the peace you protect, and the choices you make when emotions run high. Because sometimes, it's not the moments we cheer for that define us, it's the ones we never see coming.